So I have Chelsea, who, when she passed, she was 2 days old. And I had Morgan, who is my son in spirit now as well. But Morgan had the travel bug, and he said, "Mom, I don't think I'm coming back from China this time." Colin picked up the phone and he said, "Miss Boisson, it doesn't look good." He stopped breathing.
Wow. What is the significance to you to use the word transition instead of death?
I would love to talk about that. I have a medium here. She wrote all of this stuff down based on Morgan. Let's talk about it right now. I want to hear what she had to say.
This is the Lost Child podcast, where we delve into the topic of losing a child. These are real stories from real people sharing some of their darkest moments with us and their journey from that fateful experience. We have a guest with us here today, and she's going to share a little bit about her story. Let's dive into the podcast.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for coming on the podcast and sharing some of your story with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be able to be here today and to talk with both of you who have gone through the same thing that I have and that many of us have in having a child pass. And Sunny is absolutely gorgeous. And I know you're very proud of her.
She is beautiful and very sunny, like you can see.
She's so pretty, yes.
And from my recollection, I believe you actually had 2 children that ended up passing away. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Can you tell us about them? Can you tell us their names?
I would love to. So I have Chelsea, who, when she passed, she was 2 days old. And that was in France when we lived in Montpellier. And when she passed, I had been in the hospital for 2 months on an IV, and I had placenta previa, and it was a difficult time because I had Morgan, who is my son in spirit now as well, but I had him staying with my mother-in-law in another town because it was impossible for me to have him at the hospital, and my husband was working all day, every day. And so I missed Morgan, and at the same time, I wanted Chelsea to be okay. And I ended up losing my water 5 days before she was born.
Wow.
And they wanted to keep me immobile in the hospital bed because they were wanting to keep her inside of me as long as possible. But the whole time that happened, I could feel that she was moving less and less. And I knew that she was getting constricted in there. I finally had her by cesarean. And when I had her, she lived for 2 days on a ventilator in France. And that's the longest that they used to keep a baby on a ventilator. And so it was devastating, but at the same time, I got to go home and be with Morgan, which was something that was very important for me. And Morgan literally saved me from having Chelsea transition.
Here's also a reminder to subscribe and follow this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Now, back to the podcast.
I was very lucky too, because I had 2 more beautiful daughters who were born after
Chelsea?
Chelsea transitioned. Okay. And so I must say that the transition of Chelsea wasn't nearly as difficult as the transition of Morgan 20 years later.
Wow. And how old was Morgan at the point in France?
At that time, he was 2 years old.
2 years old.
And so then after that, I had Alix and Christine.
Nice.
And then we were a family of 3. And we lived in France for a while, and then we came back to the States, and we actually ended up living in a lot of different places. We lived in the Caribbean for a while, and my husband's job took us a lot of different places. But Morgan had the travel bug, and he was always studying in countries outside of the United States. He spent a semester in China for his sophomore year, and he loved it there. And he was studying East Asian studies in French. And then he went to Paris, and he studied there for, I guess, 2 months in Paris, right before he was leaving for China. And he went back to China as a senior at the University of Arizona. And he wanted to go back to perfect his Chinese. And the day that he was leaving, we were packing his bags. And he turned to me and he said, "Mom, I don't think I'm coming back from China this time."
Oh, wow.
And I said, "Morgan, you don't even need to go to China. You have plenty of credits. There's no reason that you have to go. If you feel that way, just stay here, cheerlead," because he was a cheerleader at the University of Arizona. Come back and forth to Cave Creek because we'll be able to see you more. And he said, "No, Mom, I'll be fine." And it was almost as though he was kind of looking off in the distance. And I thought, okay, if you think you're going to be fine, then that's fine. And so he left for China with a big group of kids, and he loved being over there. And he volunteered while he was there. He taught basketball. He was 6'7".
Oh,
and
my goodness.
280 pounds. So he was definitely an athlete, and he loved teaching these kids how to play basketball. He participated in the Junior Olympics, which the Olympic Games were going on in China that year. And so they had special Olympics for all of the college athletes. And because he was an exchange student, they picked him to be on the team. And he came in first for shot put for the whole of all of these Olympic Games, which was very exciting. Kind of made sense because he was, as I say, 6'7" and 280 pounds, and he was very good in shot put. But he also volunteered with a group of deaf and mute children. And I only knew all of this because we got so many letters from these kids after he transitioned. But fall break was coming up, and he wanted to go to Hong Kong because his 2 best friends from his program before had decided to stay in China, and then they moved to Hong Kong after. And they were living in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is a beautiful place, and it's a lot of fun to visit. But we were worried that if he went for fall break to Hong Kong, he might not be able to get back in with his student visa. So we said, aren't there any other places to go that the school is sponsoring? And he said, yeah, everybody's going to Tibet. 2 professors are going, and we've been learning all about the Tibetan economy. We've been learning all about the political situation, and I'd really like to go to Tibet. I've always wanted him to go to Tibet because growing up in India, I've always been very drawn to Eastern religions and to Buddhism. And so I thought it was wonderful that he wanted to go to Tibet and see. And they flew to Lhasa at 11,000 feet, and there were 13 kids on the program. And then it turned out that the 2 professors didn't end up going.
Oh, okay.
And so the next day, with a Chinese tour guide, they loaded onto a bus and they started up the mountain to go to Mount Everest. They were going up in altitude much too quickly, but nobody understood this. So all of the kids were very sick. They were nauseous and throwing up. And Morgan, because he spoke Chinese better than any of these other kids, he'd already been there, he was kind of acting like the big brother. He always did anyway. And he was helping kids when they were throwing up. It was so bad that some of the kids were urinating on themselves in the bus.
Oh my goodness.
Because this is a sign of altitude sickness,
Yeah.
but nobody understood what it was, and they were all very disoriented. And so the Chinese tour guide who was on the bus just wanted to get them up the mountain to get to the base camp before nightfall, because you really need to get to areas in those isolated places before night falls. And so Morgan got sicker and sicker, and he had a terrible migraine, which is not something that he normally does. And the only thing that he had to be able to maybe feel better was NyQuil. So he took some NyQuil when he got to the base camp and told everyone he was going to bed early. I think that, or I've been told that the fact that he is so tall affected the altitude sickness even more.
Oh, really?
But he went to sleep, and then they were in a huge yurt, which is like a tent that's all open. And he was getting up during the night and wandering around and calling people by the wrong name, which is also something that's a sign of altitude sickness. So when finally the night was over and they were about to go back down at 9:00 in the morning, they realized that Morgan was still asleep, and they went to wake him up. They couldn't wake him up, and he was foaming at the mouth.
Yeah.
And so at that point, one of the boys whose mother is a medical doctor in Seattle called his mom and said, "Mom, what should we do?" And she said, "Get him down the mountain as quickly as possible. Get him down in altitude." So these 13 kids, loaded my son, who's 6'7", 280 pounds, onto the bus, which is no easy task, and started down the mountain. And in the meantime, the director of the program called me in Cave Creek. I had just finished practicing yoga and said that Morgan was suffering from altitude sickness and that they were bringing him down the mountain right away. And he asked me if I would like to have Colin's phone number. Colin was one of his roommates, and I said I would love to. So at that point, I called him immediately, and Colin picked up the phone and he said, "Miss Boisson, it doesn't look good. He stopped breathing. We had to take him off the bus, and we're attempting CPR on him right now." And none of these kids really knew how to do CPR. These kids are all university kids, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked Colin to put the phone up to his ear. And I said to Morgan that we loved him, that we were proud of him, and not to be afraid. And at that moment, I felt this incredible hug from Morgan. In fact, every time I talk about it, I get the same hug. It was all-encompassing. I was in Cave Creek, and he was in Tibet, and I knew that he had stopped breathing, but I felt like he was right there with me. And not only that, but I experienced what Morgan was experiencing. There was beautiful colors. There were beautiful music. It was like all of a sudden I was transported to a place that where everything was perfect. And I knew he was healthy, happy, and that he was home. And I realized that we're still in school. We're still here. We're still slogging along, trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing. But it was such an incredible experience that I really wanted to meet other parents that were going through the same thing. And I have to back up because this didn't happen to my husband, and it didn't happen to my daughters either. My husband
about the
said
experience you
about
had.
the experience. My husband said to me, "Can I speak to Morgan?" And I said, "No, I'm sorry, honey. He's gone." And he said this in French because he's French, and he completely melted down, obviously. My other two daughters, one was still home, but one was at a place called Fear Farm because it was right during the Halloween time here. And she was with her boyfriend. So my other daughter heard this, called her sister and said to come home. And all of them were in the living room on their knees crying. And Morgan was probably the most important person in the world to me at that time, besides my other family members. But I had spoken to him every single day since he had been in China. He and I were just so close. And I did not feel the way that they did. I was thinking to myself, Morgan's seeing this and he's thinking, oh my gosh, they've got to get up and honor him. And in fact, we had just gotten this beautiful little teacup Yorkie. We'd never had a small dog in our lives. We'd always had big dogs. I felt like we had to get this dog when he left for Tibet. I had no idea of why. We followed the lady around town trying to find this teacup Yorkie. We couldn't figure out a name for the teacup Yorkie for 2 days, but we couldn't wait to show it to Morgan. And so at that moment in the living room, I said, and we're going to call our little teacup Yorkie Captain in honor of Morgan, because that was his name in high school. And Captain really pulled us through some of the deepest, darkest times. But I think that my family was really flabbergasted at my reaction.
Yeah.
But I was telling them, we can do this. And Morgan will be with us every step of the way. And he has been with us every step of the way. We have never, ever doubted that he's been with us. And in fact, to go a little bit farther with the story itself, I have spoken to mediums since this happened who told me that Chelsea was the first person to meet Morgan when he transitioned. She grabbed his hand and led him to us. And that's why I got that enormous hug. So I like to let people know that, because sometimes people don't understand that they would have had that incredible experience, that shared death experience with their child when their child transitioned. I think that I got that because I had already been through the transition of Chelsea beforehand.
Yeah.
Wow.
And just to clarify also for everybody, what is the significance to you to use the word transition instead of death? Just from your mouth, what?
I would love to talk about that. And I'll tell you about all of the different ways that we talk in helping parents heal.
Yeah.
So first of all, we don't think that our children are lost. And I know that that's part of the vernacular of this podcast, because we feel like they are more found than we are. I think we're a little bit lost because we are trying very difficult. It's a difficult thing to find our way after having our children transition. We also believe that they're not dead because we feel like we have a relationship with them and we feel like they're still right here. I feel like Sunny and Morgan and Chelsea are all hanging out and watching us right now. And I feel as though there's a sheet of wax paper that separates us from our kids in spirit. I feel like they're all friends. I think that they all spend time together. They help each other to show us how to communicate with them, but they also teach each other how to communicate with us. So we don't say lost. We don't say dead. We don't. One of the things that we also have changed is the word bereaved, because I think that bereaved is one of the saddest words in the dictionary. And instead of saying bereaved, one of the people that we work very closely with, her name is Suzanne Giesman, she meditated in the very beginning and tried to find a term that would be more, would express more clearly the way that we are. And she came up with shining light parent. And shining light parent is perfect for us because the light of our children shines through us. It doesn't mean that we are bright and cheerful and happy all the time, but that light shines through us all the time. And so we call ourselves shining light parents. We call ourselves shining light siblings as well, shining light grandparents, shining light dads, shining light moms. And I think that by changing the way that we're talking about this, our path to healing is so much easier. And one of the things that separates helping parents heal from other support groups is that we truly believe that it's possible to heal after the passing of a child. and many support groups that I attended in the very beginning, because when this happened with Morgan, I thought, oh my gosh, everybody must have the same experience. It must be the same way for everyone who has a child transition. I want to hear about the signs and the validations and maybe the shared death experience that other parents are experiencing. And so I would go to support meetings and I'd be excited about talking about these things. And at the support meetings, they'd say, when I'd start to talk about Morgan, we don't talk about anything like that in this type of support meeting. Sorry, we just talk about the way that our children died. And I would see that these people would be sitting around. Some of them had been there for 20 years, and they'd be repeating the same thing each time that they would get the talking stick. They would talk about how their child passed, which was so sad and wasn't helping anyone. And so in the parking lot, when I would leave these meetings, all these parents would come up to me and say, oh my gosh, I'm having the same experiences. I have the same validations. I have the same things that are happening. Tell me more about it. So 5 days after Morgan transitioned, I started an online group on Facebook to be able to meet other parents who were going through the same thing. And I met so many from throughout the world. It was really nice because it wasn't just here in the States, it was everywhere. And then we held our first in-person meeting a month later, and it was with Mark Ireland, who's the co-founder of Helping Parents Heal. And he had written a book already called Soul Shift, Finding Where the Dead Go, which is a book that I think he would probably name differently now. But at the time, it was about his son, Brandon, who also passed on a mountain, but on the McDowell mountain range here in Scottsdale. So it was a real coincidence that happened, because of the 30,000 children that I know now who are a part of Helping Parents Heal, Margaret and I are 2 of 3 that I know of who have a child who's passed on a mountain. So it brought an affinity to us. But we had that first meeting in Cave Creek, and 25 parents showed up from all over the valley.
And this was just a month after Morgan transitioned?
It was a month and a half after Morgan transitioned. And it was a wonderful meeting and very uplifting. And that's the thing about our meetings is that, and about the group itself, is that we talk about how our children lived and about the signs and the validations that we're getting from our children. And we don't focus on the point of transition, the exit point, as we say, because it's simply an exit point. And not only that, but we know from so much experience that our kids never experience pain. They are pulled out of their bodies before any of this happens. You know, Morgan was having this terrible altitude sickness where your lungs are crushed and obviously your head is just getting crushed as well. And there's so many things that are terrible that are happening. It went on for about 13 hours before he actually transitioned. So I know that a lot of people, and this was something that I really worried about at the very beginning. I would be up at night just thinking, oh my gosh, he must have suffered for such a long time. This was just terrible for him. But I now know that nobody suffers. You're pulled out of your body. You are observing from above, and you are not a part of that suffering whatsoever. In fact, if it's okay, I would love to tell about a near-death experience that a friend of mine had. She's one of our keynote speakers at the Helping Parents Heal conferences, and her name is Dr. Mary Neal, and she's an orthopedic surgeon. Have you ever heard of Dr. Mary Neal?
Yeah.
Because she's someone who is so inspiring to all of our parents. And she's inspiring because she's not only a near-death experiencer, she's also had a child pass. Her son passed.
So real quick, there was I think
on Netflix.
There was a video on Netflix called Surviving Death or something about near-death experiences. And there was actually 2 different ones, but is this the lady that was like a kayaker lady?
Yes,
is that who this is?
she was in a kayak.
Mm-hmm.
She was in Argentina,
Yes,
and she her kayak turned over, and she unfortunately stayed under the water for 25 minutes. And while she was underwater, she experienced, first of all, she was pulled out of her body immediately. She didn't feel any pain. She looked down at the kayak and she saw her body being pulled out of the kayak into the water, and she saw her joints going backward. So her knees were being bent backward.
Ugh.
And being an orthopedic surgeon, she's thinking to herself, that can't be good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it wasn't hurting. It was just kind of like a thought, that can't be good. And there was this young man on the bank of the river, and he was about 18 or 19. And she said he was kind of like a golden retriever. And he went into the water, pulled her out, and was attempting CPR on her. All the while, she was moving up towards this beautiful palace, and she was walking with all of these wonderful people around her. And she felt so good and so perfect, no pain whatsoever. And she was like, this kid kept doing this to her. So she felt like she had to go back and take a breath because he'd keep saying, breathe, breathe. So she'd go back and she'd take a breath for him, and then she'd just keep going. And that's where she wanted to be. She had 3 children at the time. She had a beautiful husband, but she was just ready to go to this beautiful place that was waiting for her. So then finally, when she gets to the place and she's really happy there, and there's beautiful music and beautiful people and everything's wonderful, they tell her she has to go back. And not only do they tell her that she has to go back, but they tell her that her son, Willie, is going to transition when he's 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so she doesn't want to go back.
Mm-hmm.
She, in spite of the fact that she has all of these beautiful children, her husband, she gets sucked back into her body. And unfortunately, she had a lot of work to do on her knees and her all of these different things to heal. It took a couple months to do so. But she couldn't get that out of her mind that Willie was going to transition early. At the same time, she'd been to where Willie was going to be when he transitioned. So it wasn't a terrible fear, but it was something that was she always thought, well, maybe they were wrong. Maybe this isn't going to happen.
How old was Willie at that time?
He was probably 8 years old at the time.
Okay, so pretty young.
And so then after that, and I may be wrong, but after that, he was training for the Olympic Games, and he was going to be, I believe, skiing. And he was training by holding onto a truck and riding along the side on a something like a ski that he was. And unfortunately, he had just turned 18, and he got hit by another truck, and he passed. So Willie did end up passing. This was very hard for Dr. Mary Neal, but again, she knew exactly where he was going. She knew that he experienced no pain whatsoever. And from what I understand, there is never any pain when our children transition. And that's something that's really important. But even more importantly, they are greeted by all of our loved ones when they arrive. They are surrounded with love. And no matter how they transition, and I think that this is important to understand, because we call a passing or the death of a child an exit point. So there are a lot of parents who are worried when their children transition by suicide. Suicide is just an exit point. They all go the same place. A lot of parents are worried about children who pass by overdosing. Same thing. It's just an exit point. And for me, I found out after Morgan transitioned through a medium, 2 days after Maureen transitioned, I was sitting with a medium that was recommended to me by a friend of my mother's, who turned out to be in Glendale in a little tiny house where I would never have found it. We went and she told me that Morgan was holding on to me around my neck and that he was like, his hands were crossed and that he was leaning his chin on my head. And I could feel him doing this. And he told the medium to tell me that if he hadn't transitioned at the base camp of Mount Everest, he would have transitioned on the I-10 coming from the University of Arizona up to Cave Creek.
Wow.
Oh, so if he hadn't gone to Tibet, he would have died that way.
It was an exit point,
Yeah.
and that this was going to happen no matter how it happened.
Wow.
Interesting.
And I've heard that from so many other parents, that if it hadn't happened the way that it happened, it would have happened another way. So, as I say, suicide, OD, any type of accident that happens is simply an exit point, because our kids have already learned all that they need to, and they're able to graduate and go to the other side and help us from there. And I can tell that Sunny is a very, very old soul by looking at her eyes. And I think that the old souls are the ones that transition and go home and then help us to be able to make this world a better place in their name. And I know too that, Blake, you were talking to me about the fact that you started this immediately after Sunny transitioned, and that helping others helps you and Camille even more. And I know that that's one of the big principles of Helping Parents Heal, is that helping others helps us even more. So when we're a caring listener and we're on the phone and we call ourselves Hearts with Ears, and we're talking to a parent who has just had a child transition, being able to come off of that call and feel like we've been able to do something to make that person feel better is enormous for us. And I think that there's a lot of collateral beauty that comes along the way. When we have a child transition, we have so many wonderful friends who come in onto our path as we're moving down the path of meeting people. We also lose a lot of friends that we were very close to before, but who don't understand how to speak to us, feel that it's contagious as well. Sometimes they feel like having a child transition is something that might be something that they could catch themselves, you know? And so I think you really learn who your true friends are when you have a child transition. Because boy, we had some friends that never left our side, and that even if they didn't know the right words to say, they were just there to listen. And I think that having friends who are there to listen are so much more important than having friends who think that they have the right solutions to help us, and who might say things that aren't as helpful as what we need. But at the same time, I've always told everyone that to have a friend who's there who says the wrong thing is 100 times better than someone who just completely exits your life. And this can be family members as well as friends. And for me, my sister, who's my only sister, was pretty much absent for the first almost year after Maureen transitioned. And I found it really hard and hurtful. But at one point she told me, she has 2 boys herself, and they were so in love with Morgan. They're younger boys, so in love with the girls as well. But she told me, seeing you reminds me of Morgan, and I love Morgan so much, I just can't be around you. And when you hear that, it's hard. I understood why this was. And especially since I feel that it was easier for me because of the fact that I'd had that shared death experience. I was able to understand this and move forward. But I do know that for a lot of parents who are in deep grief, it's really, really hard to have reactions like that from friends and family. But again, our kids send other friends and even family members into our path that may not have been a big part of our lives before, but who become big parts, and they are the collateral beauty that enters our life.
Mm-hmm.
Many people have actually shared that their relationships shift and alter over time. Some pull closer and are right there for them. Others don't understand how to handle some of the things. One thing that I would have, I don't necessarily want to just focus on like the sadness or the sorrow or whatever, but also from a relatability standpoint, right? It seems even just talking with you now, you're a very happy, cheerful type of person. And with the shared death experience that you talk about, did you actually go through much from like a grief standpoint, a sadness standpoint? It seems like you would have, because you were seeking out some of those
Like
different
seeking the medium.
groups and stuff,
Yeah.
like groups or mediums, or like the grief group you talked about, right? So it seems like you were definitely at a place where you're like, no, I need some help. I need to do something. Or was it just, you had almost this overpouring of you want to share the experience? Which one was it? Did you have some of those sadness points? And again, it's not because I just want to focus on sadness. It's because I know that some of the audience would be like, well, she's almost unrelatable, because it seems like it was this really good, wonderful experience that happened. And then speaking to you now, you almost seem like on cloud nine, which I think is amazing and wonderful. And also a great example of being able to overcome some of those hard things.
I think that the most important thing to know about me is that I think that my mission was to start this group.
Okay.
And so I think that every time that I started to feel down, Morgan would hug me from the inside. And I know that sounds, my daughters would say, Mom, that sounds creepy. He's hugging you from the inside. What is this? And it was almost as though I was drinking a glass of warm milk that would just surround me when he would hug me.
Yeah.
And I think that I was like this. I was trying to find other parents because I wanted to be able to explain to them that their kids are still right here. I also really wanted to be able to find an island, someplace secluded where only parents who had had children transition could live, because I knew that it was really hard on his siblings, on my two daughters.
Yeah.
And being able to relate to other kids in school and having a brother or a sister pass is really difficult for them. And I just wanted to have a support base for all of these people to be able to understand that it can get better, and that we can move forward and heal. And I remember I went to a support group. So I was going to these support groups to see the ways that other people handled the passing of a child or the passing of anyone. And in fact, I went to Hanson's Mortuary because they had a grief boot camp. And so I wanted to see what that was like. And I met a woman named Sandy, who's wonderful, who does these grief boot camps. But unfortunately, they were for not just people who have children who have passed, but also someone whose 95-year-old grandmother just passed. And so someone would be bawling about, their 95-year-old grandmother, and then it would get to me, and I'd, say, oh, I just had my son transition 2 weeks ago, and everyone would look at me like, and Sandy kept telling me, Elizabeth, you're okay right now, but it's going to hit you really hard. And in fact, all of my friends at the time, Morgan's football mom friends and all of these other people, she loves Morgan so much. There's no way that she's going to keep being as upbeat and as good as she is right now. In fact, I had a medium who rode to a production of My Fair, no, excuse me, was it My Fair Lady at Brophy? We drove together because one of the families had a child who had passed. No, The Sound of Music. She was playing the main role in The Sound of Music. And on the way home, and in fact, when we were in the production, I was with this medium sitting next to me who's very talented. And as she came out on stage, her brother Robbie had been hit by, he was doing a marathon for Brophy, and he was hit on Carefree Highway, actually, at about 4 a.m. I saw Robbie come out on stage too. I mean, obviously not all of Robbie, but I could see Robbie next to his sister helping him in this production. It was just incredible. And when they came to see us at the intermission, Suzanne said, I can't believe it. Elizabeth's telling me that she saw Robbie. I saw Robbie. He was obviously, and they said, we could see Robbie. I mean, it was just an amazing thing. And I think that it had to do with the stage lights and everything. But on the way home, Suzanne said to me, I don't understand you. It's only been a few months since Morgan transitioned. I have never seen a mom or a dad or anyone like you who has been able to move forward and heal the way that you have. And I said, I really don't know why that is, except for the fact that I did have that shared death experience with Morgan. And I also had Chelsea, who'd already transitioned. So I think that those two things kind of created a situation for me to be able to take this and run with it. It wasn't something that I had to think twice about. I just wanted to be able to meet other parents who had experienced the passing of a child. And one of my biggest hopes that I can do is to take away any fear that the children of the parents that I meet is not in a beautiful place, and that they're also still right here with us. I mean, they're both there and they're here. This is one of the hardest schools in the universe, our Earth school. And I believe that we choose to come here with our kids before they're ever born. We have a soul contract, and this is getting into something that's a little bit deep, but I didn't believe in soul contracts for the first 2 years after Morgan passed, because I thought, who would ever decide that we're going to come into this earth and then we're going to, into this world, and then we're going to have one of our children just pass like that a few years later or 20 years later or whatever? Who would do that? That just seems like it's not something that any normal, sane person would do. But at the same time, when you believe in a soul plan and you understand that there is a plan for all of us, you're able to sit back and allow things to happen and tell yourself, okay, that was hard, but that was a really good learning experience. And I also believe that there are people that are put here that are not necessarily our friends, who are part of our soul plans to teach us difficult things. So each time that something happens to me, I realize that this is a learning experience, and I try to learn as much as I can from that experience. And it helps me to be a better person and to be able to maybe help someone else later on in a better way.
I think that's such an amazing outlook to have. Do you feel like, so you wanted to go to these parent meetings and everything and start this right away. How did your husband feel about all of that?
Hey, we'll jump back to the podcast in just a second. If you love what we're doing here and want to support us, we started a Patreon account. It's a platform where you can sign up for a monthly subscription to help support our podcast, to help share these stories with the world. In the video description, you can find a link to our Patreon account. So please help support the podcast and help support us by visiting the link in that video description. We thank you. Now, back to the podcast.
How did your husband feel about all of that?
I think my husband was also having some of these incredible signs.
Was he?
Morgan was really active in our home right after he transitioned. And I think that he's always believed in this. He's Catholic, brought up Catholic. But living in France, there's a lot of mystical kind of healers. For instance, his parents both visited healers whenever they had problems in terms of their backs or other things. And these healers had it in their families for generations. My mother-in-law, when she lived in Zaire, and my in-laws lived overseas their whole life, they were coming home from a party, and my father-in-law had been drinking, and he had an accident, no seatbelts in the cars back then, and she flew through the windshield and had 87 stitches in her face.
Oh my goodness.
But she went through the tunnel that people talk about, like Dr. Mary Neal talks about, of light, and got to the other side. And as soon as she woke up, this was in 1975, she told everybody on the, that was there about this tunnel of light. Nobody believed her. Nobody had heard of this. So it's so interesting because Dr. Raymond Moody had published his book, Life After Life, a couple years before. He's now a very good friend of mine, actually. But he had published the book, and he then published it in French because my mother-in-law didn't speak English in 1975. So she almost immediately was able to find this book in Zaire, read the book, and realized that she wasn't crazy.
Wow.
So she had been on the other side of the tunnel, and she knew that she experienced no pain, that there was no hurt, no anything. And I think that that's something that stayed with her for the rest of her life. And by the way, her stitches, she did not have a single scar on her face.
Goodness.
Wow.
Wow.
It was just incredible. They did a fabulous job. But I think that my husband growing up in that atmosphere with his mother having a near-death experience, with his family visiting healers, and his mother was able to heal burns by a prayer. It's actually a Catholic prayer that she would do on the burn location, and it would disappear. And so I think that there were a lot of things in his life that he realized that there's more to this world than just what we see and feel.
Mm-hmm. Was this something that you had sought out stuff like mediums and stuff before?
Never.
Ever? Okay. So then what was the point that made you say, I should go see a medium?
That is a really good question. And I'll explain that. First of all, I lived in India for 5 years. So
how old were you when you lived in India?
I was in I was in middle school and then in high school. And then my parents were still there while I was going to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So I would go there in the summertime and then and then at Christmas time. But so I was drawn to Western religions already. But basically, I was training to be a yoga teacher right when Morgan transitioned. And my yoga studio owner called me about 3 days after Morgan transitioned, and she said, I have a medium here who wants to rent space in the yoga studio. I have no idea if she has any abilities, but she wrote all of this stuff down based on Morgan, and I want to see if you want to have lunch tomorrow to talk about it.
Oh, wow.
And I said, tomorrow? No, let's talk about it right now. I want to hear what she had to say. So right then, so what happened was she went into the studio Angie, who is the studio owner, gave her an early Christmas card that I had sent out almost immediately when Morgan transitioned. And it had a picture of my 3 children on it and no text on the other side except happy holidays or something like that. So she looked at the picture and she said, I see him lying on a mountain and I see a black box up to his ear. And I see him saying, I love you back, which is exactly what Morgan used to say to me whenever I would be talking to him. I see him with a band they're a band of 3 brothers. And so Colin and Morgan and Matt were roommates, and Matt and Colin stayed in Tibet, in Lhasa, until my husband could come to get Morgan. And it took a long time, even though he had a Chinese visa because he worked in China and Hong Kong. He didn't have a Tibetan visa. So he had to stay like 5 extra days to get that visa and go to Tibet. So those were the band of 3 brothers. They stayed by his side until my husband could get there. They saw him shouting through a megaphone. This is Suzanne Wilson saw him shouting through a megaphone, I'm okay. And his megaphone from his cheerleading was one of the things that we used at his service. And they also, there were so many other validations in what she was saying. And Angie wrote all of them down, but one of the biggest ones is that Suzanne drew this rock that was kind of oval shaped, and then it had a big crack in the middle of it. And she said, this is a rock from the place that he died in Tibet. She's going to receive this rock from one of the boys that was on the program. A month later, Colin brought us that exact rock.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
The exact rock. It looks exactly like the picture that Suzanne had drawn. So I wanted to go and get a reading from her, but unfortunately her husband was having health issues. And so she wasn't able to do a reading for me until, let's see, I think it was the middle of January. And no, it was before that, because she met Mark Ireland at a book fair. And she told Mark about this woman who had a child pass on a mountain, because she already knew that Mark's son Brandon had
also passed on.
So she signed the book on the mountain as well. She signed the book, he signed the book to give to me. And when she came to my house to do the reading, she handed the book to me. And the first thing that she saw as she came into the house was Morgan standing there, and Chelsea was standing there. And at the time, Morgan was 21 and Chelsea was about 19. And she said that she saw this beautiful young woman with long, dark hair and blue eyes. And my husband has really, really blue eyes and dark hair as well, who looked a little bit like Liv Tyler from Lord of the Rings, standing next to Morgan. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. I could see Chelsea looking like that. Anyway, she did a fabulous reading for us. But more importantly, she gave me that book that I read in about a day. And I got in touch with Mark Ireland. And as I say, we used that book, Soul Shift, Finding Where the Dead Go, as the first book that we spoke about when we had our meeting with 25 people.
Wow.
So yes, that was an incredible experience with a medium, and that was my first. I had never sought out mediums before this.
And even I would say you didn't necessarily seek this one out because it kind of came to your doorstep.
Yes.
And would you have said you were in the mindset that at that point you were like, oh yeah, I would totally go to a medium? Or were you just kind of like, did it even cross your mind that you should go to a medium, or you wanted to go to a medium? Or
I had
read, that's an interesting story that it just kind of showed up at your
I had read Life After
studio.
Life immediately because that was one of the things that this friend also told me. I had gone to that medium because this friend had said so. So this medium in Glendale, I had gone to. I was open to it.
Oh, that's correct.
But it was the first time I'd ever done it. And it's interesting because when we lived in India, my mom used to go to see fortune tellers, and she'd go into Old Delhi. She was with the UN Women's Club, and they'd go up these back staircases, and these people would tell them things that were impossible to know. But I never wanted to do that. I didn't want to know my fortune. I didn't want to know what was going to happen with my life or anything like that. But going to see a medium to speak to Morgan was important, and being able to see this first lady was very exciting. And then a couple days later, this happened at the yoga studio. This almost never happens, to have a remote viewing, like, the person not be the sitter. And the thing about mediumship is that a lot of times people tell you, oh, it's because they're reading your face and they're reading the signals that you're sending, or they're reading, the things that you have on. But Suzanne Wilson couldn't see me. She had no idea of who I was or where I was, and she was just reading this card. So, as I say, Angie had no idea of if what she was saying was true. So she wanted to read it to me so that I could see. And every single bit of it was true.
And what was the intent of her trying to read that? Was that her, because I know she was trying to rent part of that studio, and then the Christmas card that was there, she saw. Was there any inclination of why she wanted to do that? Or why she did do that? Well, the only
reason was because she wanted to rent space in Angie's studio. And Angie, not knowing anything about mediumship, said, well, how can you show me your abilities?
Oh, okay.
So Suzanne said, oh, I will read a picture if you have a picture. And the only picture she had there, the only one that Angie had in the yoga studio, was this picture that I had sent her. So it was very serendipitous. But there are no coincidences. I've decided that now.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that's a question that everyone would have, would kind of be the similar skepticism of like, well, show me that you're actually legit, right? That's what your friend Angie was saying, was show me, right?
And she did show her, but Suzanne decided to rent a space elsewhere.
Oh, okay.
Which is really interesting.
Is that the same Suzanne that we have a book?
No.
A different Suzanne?
That's Suzanne Giesman. Yeah.
Different.
And she's a good friend of mine as well.
Oh, wow.
So we, did you read Still Right Here? Is that?
Yeah.
So we went on a catamaran trip with her and her husband and two other couples who have children who have passed.
Wow.
That was amazing.
So then when Morgan passed, how long ago was that?
That was on October 20th of 2009. 2009. And Chelsea passed on January 23rd of 1991. So it's been a while, almost 16 years.
So then take us from that 2009 timeframe, because 2 weeks after you had one of your first meetings, right?
Right. Well, it was a month and a half.
So a month and a half. Sorry, my timing's off, but a month and a half. And then take us from there on how you've grown this organization. Well,
when I met Mark, I kept having the meetings for about 2 years. And then Mark said, you should take this and make affiliate groups, make it into something that other people can kind of do the same thing in other areas of the country and maybe other areas of the world. So we formed a nonprofit in March of 2012. And then we just kind of exploded. Everybody wanted to be an affiliate leader, which was very exciting. And we wanted to be able to have in-person meetings at as many places as possible. We also started the Caring Listeners with Dr. Mark Pitstick almost immediately as well. And
what is that, so that everybody knows?
The Caring Listeners, we have 36 Caring Listeners, and we don't want to have more because we want all of them to be able to have as much time as possible to talk to parents. But We have 11 different languages that are spoken by our caring listeners. And they are, as we say, hearts with ears. They are not trained to be counselors. They're just parents who are helping other parents. So what we do is talk about our kids, which is something that's really hard to do. Even with, again, loved ones and friends, nobody wants to talk about our children because they think it's going to make us sad, which is completely the opposite. Even if we are shedding tears of joy, they're tears of joy because we're getting to talk about our kids. So the caring listeners talk about our kids with us. They help newer parents to move forward and heal. And we say that they've moved down the healing path a little bit further and they reach a hand back to others to help them forward.
And is there a section on the website that talks about caring listeners, or how can somebody...
There's a tab and the phone numbers are on there as well as their email addresses. And on the caring listener page, we ask that whoever is interested in speaking to a caring listener first text and just set up a time because that's easier than getting a call. We have all of their bios and all of their pictures on there as well. So we try to have kind of a representation of different ways that children may have transitioned. Yeah. Because even though it doesn't matter to us, it's just an exit point, it does for parents. Parents like to be able to find people who have gone through the same kind of experiences and they identify with them. Mm-hmm. So we have the caring listeners, we have our affiliate groups, and our affiliate groups are, in the beginning, they were meant to be in person, but then COVID hit. And so we now have a lot of affiliate groups that have Zoom meetings, and the Zoom meetings are wonderful. So they can happen in a country across the world, depending on the time zone, and still be able to have people attend from the other side of the world. And we have special interest groups. So we have groups that are specifically for parents who have children who passed, who took their lives. We have groups for children who have done substance use. And that's another thing. We never say substance abuse. I mean, a lot of times it can be too much cough syrup or things like that, you know. And then we also have groups specifically for parents who have children who have passed to cancer or an illness. We have groups for parents who have children who passed in college. We have groups for parents. There are just so many special interest groups that are listed on the children, parents of who have children of special needs as well. Who have transitioned. We have a group for parents who have all of their children who have transitioned as well. So there are a lot of different groups to choose from, and they all have possibilities of joining online. But then we also have groups throughout the world. So we have Canada, the United States, Mexico, Brazil, the United Kingdom, as well as Sweden and Norway, and then the United Arab Emirates, South Africa, India, and Australia, New Zealand, and we just added Hong Kong as well.
Wow.
And they do in-person meetings at most of these places?
They do in-person meetings, and they also do Zoom meetings.
Okay. Depending on
how far apart the parents are.
And the places that you can find this at are helpingparentsheal.org, the website. And then there's also a big Facebook group that was created by you guys.
We have hundreds of Facebook groups, but the main Facebook group, which is just Helping Parents Heal, is the one that we post all of the Zoom meetings in.
Yeah.
And then we also post all of the kids every day for their birthdays and angel dates. And we have a place on our website where you can enter your child. And so we only have 18,000 children on the tributes page, but we're hoping that everybody will add them because it's really nice to have all of the kids up there and to be able to honor them. And then we also have a page that's our YouTube channel that has, by categories, all of the different people who have spoken to us over the past years, including Dr. Raymond Moody and Dr. Eben Alexander, as well as Dr. Mary Neal and all of these other people. But we have about 800 YouTube videos now, as well as a newsletter that comes out every month, and it has validation stories from parents. We publish, or I publish, a weekly newsletter as well to tell all of the events that are coming up in the coming week. And then we also have Helping Siblings Heal, a group just for siblings. We have Helping Fathers Heal, which is a group just for fathers. And this is really important because siblings and fathers heal differently from moms in a lot of ways. And so, and dads really like to have a safe space to express themselves. And I think siblings do too. And I'm thinking we also have conferences every 2 years. And Irene Vouvoulidis, who's our vice president, is in charge of the conference. And she and I are the ones that put the conference on. And last year, we had 1,200 parents who came from all over the world with 44 speakers. And we held it at the Sheraton Grand Wild Horse Pass. And we're going to do that in 2026 as well.
Wow.
But this will be our fourth next time.
And how long is the conference for?
It goes over 3 days. But people usually get there beforehand because there are other activities that go on beforehand as well.
Oh, that's so amazing what you've been able to accomplish.
Oh, thank you. You too, in such a short time.
Yeah.
One question that keeps coming to mind, because you've said it a couple times, is that you can heal from this. However, the rest of society kind of holds that, and other grief groups and stuff are like, nope, this is something that you'll have for the rest of your life. It's something I've heard, right? We've had a couple guests on here that have been like, no, you can definitely be healed from this. And I feel like I am. And these are the reasons why, right? So I guess with somebody being like, no, you can't heal, what would you say to that person?
Well, first of all, I think that it's really important to understand that your own healing journey can take as long as you want, and it's not going to have any effect on our kids. Our kids are in complete bliss, but they are also helping us to move forward and heal. And so their timeline, their time frame is very different from ours. So seeing us sad doesn't affect them the way that maybe it would for us if we knew that they were sad. They're not sad. The main thing is that they would love nothing more than for us to be healed. And in fact, when we have meetings, and a lot of our parents have actually become mediums through the connections that they feel with their children, but they will see the kids high-fiving each other each time that they see a parent smile, which is something that's so important to them because they want us to be able to be happy. They want us to honor them. They want us to help our siblings as well, the siblings who are here, who are going through a very difficult time as well. But mostly they just want us to be happy. And so if we are listening to the kids, we are going to heal. If we're in a deep state of grief, then it's going to take longer. And that's okay. It can take as long as it has to. In fact, we had a mom who came to us 10 years after her son transitioned. And she came to the first meeting, and it was very unusual because it was Suzanne Wilson who was actually doing gallery readings at that meeting. And the room was packed. We had over We had about 120 people there, so there was no room. But she went to a second door, and a friend of hers was sitting there, and she said, "Come sit here." And there was a seat for her. And the first person that came through was Kenny, her son. And she said, "Well, where have you been all this time?" She was really angry. And he said, "I've been through the medium. I've been here all along. I've just been waiting for you to be open to this." And every single meeting that she came to, over and over again, Kenny was the first person to come through. And she is a huge believer in all of this now. But the main thing that's important to understand is that those 10 years when she was healing, she was on her healing path, but very angry. It wasn't affecting Kenny, but he was like, "Come on, Mom, you can do this. You can understand." And I think that's what I tell people is that it might not be the right time right now. And it might not be the right time in this lifetime too. I don't ever want people to feel like they have to heal after the transition of a child. But I do know that it makes our kids happy when we do heal. And it also makes our children happy when we heal too.
Another question I would have is, if you are religious, how does your religious beliefs blend with what's happened to you from a mediumship standpoint?
That's a really good question. And I must say that I'm not really religious. Okay. I grew up, as I say, in India. So I was fascinated by the Eastern religions, and my family is religious, but more my grandparents and not my parents. And I do know that it is a conundrum for some people who are very religious, but I do think that it fits really well with all types of religions, because I think that all types of religions know that there's something more than just death. Death is not the end for any religion that I know of. I think that it's really fortunate for our group that we do have quite a few people who are very religious, like Daniel John, who's a medium. And just last week, he did a whole YouTube video on his belief and then how he reconciles that with being a medium.
Oh, wow.
Stacy Lynn Cripps is another medium that we have who's very religious as well. And she reconciles that with being a medium as well. But I haven't ever had to reconcile it.
Okay. No, thank you for that and explaining some of that. So then the other thing I would say is, based off your group, your experience and other things, similar to the story you just shared of, I forget her name, but her son's name was Kenny. So Kenny's mom,
Margaret.
How Margaret, after those 10 years, was able to kind of break through that barrier that she had kind of put up on herself. If you were to give advice to anyone to try to break down that barrier, what advice would you give?
Well, I think that being able to hear from your child the first time, I mean, in a way that there's absolutely no denying that it's your child, will make it so that you're never, ever going to turn back. And I feel very grateful that we have these meetings and that so many parents get these validations. I also think that a validation for one parent is a validation for all of us, because seeing the effect that this has on that parent is pretty amazing. I think that that's probably the easiest way to break through. But I also think that raising our vibration, being able to spend more time outside, possibly meditating, doing yoga, doing sound healing, doing all of these different modalities that we use so frequently, or artwork is another healing modality that we use, or we have EMDR specialists. Actually, it's called Shiomi Healing that's going on right now through Helping Parents Heal. That's very helpful and that allows breakthroughs for parents as well. But I think that just being able to talk to other parents who understand and who have moved forward on this path is one of the best ways to be able to start to heal.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you for answering those questions. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us or with the audience?
Nothing except that I'm just very grateful that you invited me. I am really, really, I'm grateful that you have made this beautiful studio in Sunny's name. And I know that she's very proud of you. And I think that this will help a lot of parents to be able to understand what it's like and to be able to move forward and heal as well. And what you're doing is healing yourselves as well.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on the Lost Child podcast. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. And remember, shine bright, and we'll see you in the next episode.